Ready to start?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're sitting here on the USS Slater, and that's a destroyer escort in Albany, 766. And our guest today is
Phyllis Townsend. Phyllis Hayter Townsend.
all right, Phyllis. And so, why do you have an interest in destroyer escorts?
Because one of the destroyer escorts, the USS HAYTER, is named for my dad, who was a Naval Academy graduate, class of 1924, celebrating their 100th anniversary now.
Okay.
But I don't think anybody's there, really. But anyway, his class had destroyer service, and he had been the captain of a four-stacker destroyer in 1939.
What was the name of that ship?
The USS Ramsey,
Okay.
number 16, hull number 16. And it had been on neutrality patrol between Port Angeles, Washington, and Alaska.
Okay.
It made many a trip back and forth up along there, while we were not yet involved.
Now,
And-
were your parents married at that time?
Yes.
And who stood up for your father when he got married? Did he have a best man?
Oh, I can't remember. No, he
No.
was married in my grandmother's house.
Okay.
And then that ship he commanded, and he took out to Hawaii in 1940. And we got to Hawaii in December of 1940. We came later on the passenger ships. Very little airplane way. Now it's all airplane out there, but you went with passenger ships.
Okay.
And we landed there in early December of 1940.
We being your family.
Yes, my
What
family.
did your family consist of?
My mother, my older sister, myself, and then 10 years, and then my brother.
Okay.
And so we were quite a packet for my mother to handle on a ship. We got out there and looked around, found a house, and the house that we had was on Aleva Drive, which is one of the ridges that go up between the city of Honolulu here, which is where most of the tourists go, and the Waikiki area there is so popular, and Diamond Head is over here. And then over here is Pearl Harbor.
So could you see Pearl Harbor from your home?
We went and stood in the driveway,
Right.
and we looked over that way, and there was Pearl Harbor.
All
It's
right. So
like
on
this.
December 7th, 1941, were you home?
Yes.
And where was your father serving at that time?
He had been transferred in the end of January from the destroyer that he commanded, the Ramsey. He had been transferred to a heavy cruiser, the USS New Orleans. And all heavy cruisers, all cruisers, light and heavy, were named for cities in those days, just as all battleships were named for states,
States, yeah.
Missouri, Wisconsin, etc.
New Jersey, yeah.
And as a matter of fact, his very first ship, when he joined the line, was the Arizona. That's how he started his naval career, was on the Arizona as an ensign. But he had been transferred to the New Orleans. It was tied up across from the Battleship Row and Ford Island.
What was his job?
He was the third in command. First lieutenant and damage control officer was his official title.
And a damage control officer, what is their job?
Their job is to, when they're in battle, they're the ones that get the ship, keep it afloat, and patch it up as it's.
And make sure all the watertight doors are closed.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
And it's training.
All right. So on that morning, December 7th, he was aboard his ship.
Yes.
Was his tour ending in the morning,
Yes.
Sunday morning?
His commander, the captain, and the executive officer were ashore, and he being the third in command that night before he had the duty. And it ended at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
And
So how was he going to get home?
he was going to get home by my mother driving out and picking him up.
And did she take that ride?
Yes, she did.
And
She
what
put my brother in the car, and she drove out, and she got to the main gate.
At Pearl Harbor?
Yes. And that was when it was just starting, bang, bang, bang.
This was the Japanese attack began.
Yes.
So she was there at the beginning.
Right there at the main gate.
Okay.
And so the person on duty there said, "Lady, go home." And she turned around and she came back. And meanwhile, my sister and I had been asleep. And
How old were you then?
I was in the 9th grade.
Okay.
I had just, yes. in the
So you
9th
woke
grade.
up.
My sister came and woke me up, and she said, "Look, now I think there's something going on at Pearl Harbor." And I said, "Oh, well, what could that be?" And anyway, got up, we went out and we looked, and oh, yeah, indeed there was. My. And first thing we thought, oh dear, well, where's Dad? Well, here's where his ship is. They were very fortunate. The ship, pretty large, was having repairs done to some of its engines. And they were under this hammerhead crane, which is very large, and it goes way up high, and it was there over the ship because it had been lifting out heavy materials, mechanical stuff. And so when the planes came in on that first run, they were headed for the battleship row. And we were right across from the USS New Orleans, was right across from the Arizona. And the airplanes had to go up and then down to make their run. So they skipped anything on the New Orleans. The New Orleans could do nothing because it had, it was tied up on the pier,
Right.
and it was going nowhere.
Right.
And the engines wouldn't run. And then of course, up went the Arizona, and right next to her was moored the Vestal. Thank goodness, because it could get its what class of ship is the Vestal?
Repair ship. Yeah.
A repair ship, yes.
Now, did you actually see the explosion of the Arizona?
Right as I came to look at what my sister told me to look for, whoa! And it was a big explosion. And of course, the first thing was what had happened to Dad. And meanwhile, he had, as part of his duties, and he had worked with the chaplain, it being Sunday morning, they had taken one of their boats, and all the Catholic sailors that wanted to go to Mass had been put on that little boat and sent off to one of the ships that had a Catholic chaplain. This was the way you worked in the Navy.
Sure.
When you cooperated with other ships. And so they're out there in the middle of the water with these airplanes coming down around them and, firing and everything. And so they were certainly in harm's way. But
now the second wave came from a different direction.
Yes,
did you see
it
any
did.
of those planes?
They went directly over our house. They came in from what is known as the Kaneohe area on the north side of Oahu. And actually, we had a naval base there, a naval air station there. I don't know, I don't think it's there anymore. I think there are hotels.
Well, what did you see?
What I saw were these planes coming through the Pali and going along Nu'uanu Valley. They were fairly low. They were not up high. And they went right over where our house was on the pathway to Pearl Harbor. And so there were, my sister and I are standing right there in the driveway looking up. And I thought, oh good, our planes are coming. No, there were not stars on those wings. There were round circles, round red circles, and they were Japanese. And I could see them, you could see the pilots up in them. There was a great deal of firing by that time of anti-aircraft, all of the other ships that could be there. My uncle was in submarines, and he had been at the submarine base. And on his ship, they ran up and they started firing. They claimed that they had shot down one of the Japanese ships, airplanes. I don't know, how could you claim with so many people? And anyway, my mother had returned to us and said, oh dear, well, she said, you are sitting on the ringside seat to history. And she was certainly correct in that regard.
And what did she do for that, after that?
The day before, she and my brother had gone farther up the 11 Drive, which you could walk to the end of the paved road, and then there was a dirt track that went farther up. But there were a lot of guava bushes. And my brother and my mother had filled up some baskets, and they came back with all these wonderful, beautiful guavas. She went into the kitchen and she began making guava jelly.
Yeah, well, she had to keep busy.
And we had the radio on.
Yeah.
And they kept saying, this is the real McCoy. This is not a drill. Stay in your houses. Don't go out on the street, And very little was happening in Honolulu itself on that side of our view. And I think later people claimed that there were bombs and things. Most of it was what comes down out of the sky when you've got anti-aircraft.
So was there any concern about Japanese invasion of Oahu?
Oh, indeed there was, and that and sabotage. As you know, there was they kept saying, we are being under attack. This is the Japanese are attacking us. So they instantly identified who was doing the attacking, and we went, oh dear, well there's a very large population here. And we said, oh my. So we expected all sorts of sabotage. You heard that word quite often in the...
What about a concern about anybody parachuting in?
Oh, indeed. That was the era of the parachute drops and things on places. It's one of the main factor of a blitzkrieg, which we'd already watched in Europe.
So you were concerned about that?
We were certainly indeed concerned about that. We thought, well, there must be another fleet somewhere. The last battle has the long name Tassafaronga.
Tassafaronga, okay.
Which, and then sometimes you see Cape Esperance as also a name, but nobody knows it very much. And it's the one that was a disaster. You don't talk about that. At least you didn't. It was never released to the reporters. So the general public knew nothing about Tassafaronga. And in that battle, ships of the Navy were going along, and they were to prevent these troop transports coming down, and the final attempt at reinforcing Guadalcanal
By the Japanese.
by the Japanese. And I mean, the Guadalcanal had been one long, tough battle for the 1st Marines, and later the Army comes in, and they are having a tough battle too. So it's it certainly has taken its toll there. And these are what is it? Into the Valley was one of the famous books that was written about Guadalcanal. But Tassafaronga, not very many people have heard of it or know about it, except the crews and the families of those who were there, because you had the USS Minneapolis, large heavy cruiser, the USS New Orleans, heavy cruiser, USS Pensacola, heavy cruiser, and the Northampton light cruiser. Those were the large ships. Plus, they had screens around them. I think there are 4 destroyers with them. And as they're moving towards Guadalcanal, towards Cape Esperance, the Japanese under Admiral Tanaka, who was an extraordinary admiral and very successful, but he didn't reinforce them, and he goes off. They give him other duties, and you never hear of him again.
So what happened to the New Orleans?
The New Orleans, as it's moving along, it is, I believe it was the 2nd in the lineup. They are hit by a spread of long lance torpedoes, which were very advanced weaponry. They're huge. There are several of them that are in memorials around the place, including the Naval Academy. And these, the long lance was loaded with power, and it struck the New Orleans in the bow, and literally the bow is blown off of the New Orleans. So the 2nd turret, large turret at the bow, is hanging over empty space here. And right behind, and it was a combination of hitting not only where the ammunition was stored, but also where the aviation gasoline was. And there is a it's not famous because nobody knows about this battle, but there was a combat artist who captures it, and there it goes, up into this huge fireball went up into the air. And all the other ships saw it and everything. The Minneapolis had gotten a blow. It had been damaged, and it had casualties, but there were 174 casualties that
On the New Orleans.
on the New Orleans.
What was your father doing at this time?
He was in his duty station, which is the damage control, and right next to him is the plot room, where you actually push the buttons that fire the guns. The people train the guns, yes, but you push the buttons there. And that has, again, these young men in it, that was their duty station. And the explosion lets out chlorine gas. And so this, as one of them explained to me, he said this green fog just comes in. And they have gas masks, and then what are they going to do? So my dad realizes how bad the situation is, because he's getting reports from his people that are assigned to damage control
Right.
duty, and they're closing hatches like mad, and that aren't even already closed before. But some of the hatches were also blown open, and you had to go close them again in order to keep the water out of the ship as much as possible, because the ship now the New Orleans is now down by the head, sort of. But its propellers are still in the water. However, as it breaks the keel, or as there's this part of the keel that just buckles down this way, so it's just pulling. And as the whole bow goes by, it scrapes along the side. So there's another hole damage there. So there is plenty of damage on this ship. And it, the executive officer was at the rear steering, and he takes over because the bridge is just, it's not gone, but the concussion.
Right.
It just flew, everybody's on the floor.
Okay.
They're trying to bring themselves back to consciousness. And so, meanwhile, my father went to the plot room. He opened that door to let those people out, and there's a mast that went right through the damage control area. And inside the mast, you opened a hatch, a small hatch. You had to kind of crawl into there, and you could go up on these rungs, and you went up a couple of decks, and you came out at another small hatch that was in the officer's wardroom, which was by the bridge. So these people all got out. There was one who didn't have a gas mask. My father gave his gas mask to him, and up they went. Meanwhile, my father's team was already dead, because both from the blast itself and the gas, and he tried to get out, and he was a very large, 6'3".
He'd been a wrestler at Annapolis.
He'd been a crew.
Crew.
He'd been varsity crew, rowed number 3 on the varsity boat. And so he was a fairly large person. And the space is not all that big on the inside of a mast, though you're happy to have it, because I've talked to the ones that crawled up those rungs. He said they were never so happy in their life when they finally just fell on the wardroom floor when they got out, because they couldn't believe they were still alive. And anyway, that's how my father died. And so we had gotten the call.
So he received an award for that.
He got the Navy Cross,
The
which
highest
is
award you can get in the Navy.
That is that, and that's the one that is most treasured, because he'd been given by your peers. It's they're the ones that decide who has really done the job.
Was that the end of the ship for the war?
No.
Well, what happened?
No, indeedy.
All right.
They got it, the executive officer and his crew and everybody on that crew of the New Orleans. They did their thing. They saved the ship, and they got it back to Tulagi, which is right across from Guadalcanal, and they pulled it in, and there was a repair ship there. Who'd have thought there would be a repair ship where you need it? And boy, did they need it. They sent divers down, and they were able to, that piece of the keel that was hanging down and pulling the ship down by the head, they were able to detach that. It's lying on the floor now at Tulagi.
And then they went to Australia,
and
didn't
up came the ship. They were able to dewater the ship,
Yeah.
and then they put logs in front of the ship, because now it's just straight across. And they got the ship going. It had 2 destroyers to escort it back to Sydney.
Did they go
That's
backwards all the way?
No, not all the way. First, when they first went, it was fine. It was calm. They were going along and going along. And then one of the things that happens in that area is that you get squalls and you get turbulence in your ocean. Who'd have thought when it surrounds that great big island of Australia? And it looked like it was really going to sink. And we found out later that the crews of the destroyers were taking bets on when it was going to sink.
Wow.
And they turned, and this is difficult to do. This is really a masterpiece of navigation. Turned it around and they went backwards along the way for a while till they were out of the squall. They got into calm weather again, and they were able, again by masterful navigation, able to turn this huge ship around. And they steamed into the harbor at Sydney, and they were waiting for them. They had their radio communications, and they were able to say, "We're on our way, we're coming." And
That's a long trip.
that is a long, yeah, go look on a map. From the Solomon Islands to Sydney is a long way.
Now, did ultimately they go back to Bremerton to get a new output on?
First they got what they called a snub hull put on in Sydney, and it was just like 90 degrees thing. But at least it parts the waves instead of pushing the waves. You're not a barge anymore. Right. And so they took off the big 8-inch gun. So that lightened things up. And they turned it around. They got it back to Pearl Harbor. And Pearl Harbor said, "No, they're waiting for you in Bremerton." And Bremerton, Washington, the naval yard there, and that one's still on duty. And they came through, and the people looked at this and they said, "How could you possibly come all that way from Sydney, Australia? How many time zones is that? At least 7 or more."
A lot.
That's a lot.
Right.
And I think you go through an international date
You do,
line too.
absolutely, yeah. But they were able to attach a new...
Again, the Navy does extraordinary things. The Bureau of Ships had gotten out the plans of the New Orleans, which were made in 1932-33, for goodness sakes, and they constructed a bow in the dockyard at Bremerton. And so they positioned the ship, they got it up, and they were able to take off the snub bow and whatever they had to do.
Yeah.
And the next thing, it's been pushing up or getting in there somehow. It fit.
And they had to repair the keel also.
I think you had to do that. I mean, the whole, everything fit.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Yeah.
And the people at the Bremerton Navy Yard referred to it as the miracle ship.
Well, it was, thanks to your father. But let me ask you, did you stay in Hawaii the entire war?
No. When things were going badly, like I told you about, and we were losing the Philippines, we were sure that the next attack was, and actually Midway was the pre-1 4 going on, and and you didn't want to upset people because people were very excited, especially if you lived on the West Coast. You were worried. And the Navy, again, said the dependents are all going. They had been taking dependents off if they wanted to go before, but they said, "No, you're going." So my mother said, "I don't want to go. I would like to stay here." and because we were sure that Dad would at least come back to Pearl Harbor once or twice or something. And they said, "You're going on this ship." And my father had filled out the evacuation papers, and he had put down the hometown of my mother before he met her. And we could never quite figure out why he did that, but he did. It was southern Minnesota.
So that's where you went.
So we were sent to
Now let me ask you,
southern
were you
Minnesota.
concerned, so on this ship going from Hawaii to the West Coast,
Oh.
were you worried about anything?
Why, yes. I was
What were you worried about?
I was convinced we were going to be torpedoed. I had it in my mind. It was an idée fixe. And I just said, I'm going to be torpedoed. I had heard about people being torpedoed, and I thought, well, what do? They get into lifeboats. And I went to the deck that had the lifeboats, and I said, I'm staying here.
At your battle station. Were
Was
you
it-
accompanied by any ships?
When we left the harbor, oh my goodness, we certainly were. And there were just plenty of ships. And I thought, well, maybe not. Maybe we will get there all right. 5 days we were looking forward to. We got on the ship. It was the same ship that we had gone out as this luxury passenger ship.
That's the SS Laureline.
The Matson Line's
Right.
flagship SS Lurley.
Yeah.
That's the ship we went out on, had the lays all over you when you were you left, you couldn't have any lays. And you couldn't throw them in the water, which is supposed to bring you back to Hawaii, you know. And so we got on the ship. There was one other ship with us, passenger ship, and that was the British ship, the Aquitania. It had taken soldiers to Australia. And we had, unbeknownst to me, because I thought we had all these beautiful, wonderful ships around us, and I went to sleep. I woke up the next morning. There's nobody there. Here's the wide, wide sea, and we're all alone. So I ran to the other side of the ship, and I looked over, and oh, all right, there was the huge Aquitania, which was larger even than our ship, and in between was a Navy ship.
What ship was that?
It was the USS St. Louis,
Was that also a cruiser?
and it was a light cruiser.
Was there anybody
Yeah.
on? Who was the navigator of that ship?
Yes, the navigator of that ship was my father's classmate, who becomes my father-in-law later, years later.
Small world.
Small world. And every morning, his ship would go off. It would leave us alone, and it would make a circle
Right.
around us.
Right.
It was doing reconnaissance. I finally did dope that out and said, well, why can't they
Now,
have two of them?
Speaking of your father's classmates, when you got married, was one of your father's class, and your father had been passed away?
Yes,
and,
he had.
And who is it? One of your
The-
father's classmates
yes.
come along, and who was
Yes,
that?
yeah, it was a man named Sam Kelly. I'd been Dad's a classmate. He and his wife had been very good friends of my family. I asked him if he would be the one to give me away, and he did. And
Now,
another thing
had he been in World War II?
Oh yes,
And
he was
tell us about what happened to him.
He was the navigator on the on the Northampton at Tassafaronga, and it's the one that sank.
So he was in the water.
He was in the water. He was floating around, and other sailors were around. They had those cork things. You're inside them, and that keeps you, at least you're out of the water for a bit. And the Honolulu was, oh yeah, I forgot to say, the Honolulu was also with that task force. And it was coming along, and they were calling, Honolulu, Honolulu. And they were afraid that it was going to go by them, and not because it was dark. Everybody kept emphasizing how dark it was at Tassafaronga. And he had a pen that they give to navigators. So they're in the chart room, and you've got all the lights off, you know. But you still have to see on the map where you're going, and there's a blue little light. And he had this, and he turned it on, and that's what they saw. And they came over to his, yeah, how about that? Isn't that incredible?
So then he stood up, he
Yep.
brought you home to
Yep.
the wedding. Wow.
My mother was notified that there would be a ship named for my dad. And she went down to, she was told she could take one person with her, so she took my sister, older than I, and she took her. They went by train from Minnesota down to Charleston Navy Yard, which is no more. But at the Charleston Navy Yard, they built ships, and not only repaired them, they did the building of ships too. And so they had built the ship, and then they 2 months or 3 months later, they commissioned the ship. So, which was that was the wonderful part, because they got to meet the whole crew. The captain, and he was a naval reservist who had been in the Merchant Marine. Captain Huey, I think his name was. Somebody takes his place a little later on.
Captain Theobald.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and but they had the whole crew assembled for this ceremony. So the first thing she does, they hand her this champagne bottle, which is inside of it's chrome or something, but it's the shape of a champagne bottle, and it has a plaque on it, and it's telling what this is going to be used for, and it had the ribbons, red, white, and blue, hanging on it. And she picks this thing up. It's a heavy thing, and I don't know what it was like when it was filled with champagne. Mother, how did you do this? And she goes whack against the jackstaff. And that's when she christened the ship, and there's a picture of her. The spray it's all over the front of her suit. Then the captain came out, the commandant of the Navy Yard, and the captain of the Hayter, and he commissions the ship. That means it goes into duty as of that time. It goes into duty in the U.S. Navy.
They manned the ship, but
Yep.
but then was there a yeoman there who got involved?
There
later?
was a yeoman there
What
who
was
was
his name?
on the staff. The crew was fully formed.
Right.
So when we were there, we could look around and you can see they're all standing. They all are watching
Right.
this ceremony. So, and they had a microphone and stuff, and the yeoman, which, as you know, is the man who he knows everything. He's in charge of who is who and where and what, and they're And he was a man named Fox. His last name was Fox.
Oh.
And you have right there.
Oh, we have right here, Alan Fox. But then,
How about that?
but then, what happened with the 212 area code?
Well, that was supposedly when you manned those ships, you had sonars on them, so you had to have, because they were going to be pinging for
Right.
submarines, and you've got to have somebody at one end who knows what they're doing. And the Navy had sent these young men. They're only 17, 18
Right.
years old.
Right.
They're most of them just out of high school. And there are a few seasoned ones
Right.
that are regular Navy ones, but not many of them. Most of them are just very young. And he was a sonar man, and he did not stay in the Navy after the war. They were all offered. They said, "Oh, would you want to
Yes,
stay?"
sure.
No, we want to go home. We want to get on with our lives. And
His name McGuire, this guy?
yes, McGuire, and Ken McGuire, and he went to work for Bell Labs, and they brought him along, and he ended up with the one of his jobs as he was going along was to decide the area codes, put those into effect. And he said, "I live in Manhattan, 212. That's the whole number of the USS HAYTER. That's the ship I served on." There you go.
Wow.
Well, you learn something new every day.
That's your husband, right?
Yes.
Was he in Pearl Harbor when that happened in December 7th,
No,
1941?
His dad was, of course.
Yeah.
On the,
He was not, though.
But yes, the family was.
Okay,
but
so
they
he-
were not in. Arthur was not in on his ship at Pearl Harbor.
But
He heard the radio, and he said he instantly got in it, and he picked up a bunch of other people on the way to Pearl Harbor, and because they were just standing out, thumbing rides to get that way, and his wife, her name was Nayetta, and they had two boys, Jack and Tom, and Jack, his mother turned to him and said, "Take care of your brother, I've got to go out with your dad." She had on her nurse's uniform. She had been a nurse before she married her husband. And she said, "I'm going to go out with him." She went out with him. They parked the car, all these people went to their ships. Artie went to his ship, the St. Louis. She went to the hospital at Hospital Point. And she walked in and she said, "What do you need? Well, how can I help?" And 3 days, she said she hardly slept at all. But they were inundated, of course.
now Jack, who was a young man,
He was in the was it 11th
Junior
or 12th
ROTC
grade?
or something,
in the
wasn't he?
junior ROTC at Roosevelt High School, and they've sent him up to the high school, gave him a rifle, and said, "You're going to protect this because the parachutists are coming." And so he left his brother and said, "Watch out for yourself." And his brother was old enough to. I don't know.
So later he wound up going to the Naval
And
Academy.
he went to the Naval Academy. They left very shortly. They left in December and went back to Florida.
Now let me ask you a question. You're going to Vassar College, a very important place in the late 40s, right? And did you have an occasion to go to the Naval Academy then when you were a young student?
Yes.
Tell us
When I
about it.
was a student,
Yeah.
my mother had come back from the trip she made to South Carolina on a train. She met a lady and said, "Where should I send my daughter to college?" And the lady said, "Well, send her to Vassar."
But while you were there, did you have an
Yes,
occasion to go to Annapolis?
Yes, my mother, the Hayter, which had just completed its change from being a destroyer escort to the APD status
Right.
of it, which was, what's that, attack destroyer?
And
Personnel
Yeah, personnel.
Yeah,
Assault personnel destroyer.
that's the, thank you, that's the correct
All right, I do the
title.
same for a friend.
APD, okay.
APD.
So,
And it went down to Annapolis for Navy Day. And that's the day when all the ships come into port. You dress the ship, you get the lemonade out, you make the sandwiches, and you take people on tours of the ship, your tax dollars at work.
Okay, and you had to go.
And my mother said, would you want to go since I couldn't take you to...
Did you meet anybody on that trip?
Well, strangely enough, my mother called up the Townsends and said, I know you're living in Annapolis. Would you mind if my daughter came down this weekend and could she stay with you because she's going to go out to visit the ship named for her dad?
So this is your
And
father's
they said-
classmate,
My father's
who's been a
classmate
navigator on the St. Louis.
on the St. Louis.
Right.
And so he was stationed in Washington, D.C. They were living in Annapolis, commuting. It's easy. And so I went down. They met me at the train station of the Washington Annapolis we used to call it the bump and amble. It was the little commuter train from Baltimore to Annapolis.
Okay.
And they met me at the little train station there, and then they took me out, so I got to see the ship. And I got to see it with, it had, not a lot had changed as far as the,
Yeah. Now, did you see anything else that day?
I saw him.
Oh, him who?
Well, their son, their old,
And what was he doing?
he was going to he was a plebe at the Naval Academy.
This is Jack?
Yes, the same one who was supposed to repel the
attack.
parachutists.
Yeah. Now, did he ever have a chance? I mean, did you give him
I don't know.
a chance, or you just tell him that this is your next duty station?
No, I don't know how that evolved. But
So he graduated from Annapolis. He became a Marine.
Yes.
Served in Korea and Vietnam.
Yeah, and yeah,
And he's Maureen's father.
yes.
And
Yeah.
Maureen's grandmother was also Maureen.
Well, she's named for my mother.
That's it. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then her next name is for my mother-in-law's middle name, Catherine. And then the third name, all my children have 4 names. Oh, how
Well,
could I
they're
do
very
that?
posh people.
And the third name is Augusta, because Dad had been on the Augusta.
Okay.
So we looked at I did have ships, pictures of all of these ships.
Yeah.
And my husband looked at it one time, he said, well, I'll be damned. 4 destroyers and 1 cruiser.
Wow. 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 Well, this has been really, really exciting for you to go through all this.
Well, thank
Story.
you. Thank
It's
you for
so
inviting
interesting.
me
So
and
interesting.
finding so many different little nuances.
Well, I listened.
Yeah, I know, but you remember, and you get all of these coincidental things, and they can't be coincidental.
Right.
Somehow, they've got to be aligned.
Today we went to breakfast and we met somebody whose daughter is a professor at Vassar. Right?
Yes.
It just keeps happening.
My
So
uncle-in-law teaches at Vassar.
Oh,
you're on. Oh,
oh my!
What
What's
does he
he teach?
History.
Great.
Oh, we were so hoping they'd open up their building like
And
they
they
did 5
didn't.
years ago, and they hadn't.
Maureen, did you go to Vassar? Or
I did not.
No,
I
okay.
competed against Vassar.
Okay. Where'd
I
you
was
go?
a Springfield, Mass.
Oh, okay.
jock.
Okay.
So we competed against Vassar in the early 70s.
oh. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. It's so nice to be
Well,
with you.
thank you for being so sweet and all coming here and meeting and taking the time to.
I know. How can we get a copy of this?
Do you want the raw files, or do you just want to get the
No,
finished?
you're not doing this right. When I get the pictures of the Ramsey, you'll get the copy of this.
Deal.
There you go.
And any of